Welcome everybody. We are very happy and honored to have you by us in Hungary, in Budapest. And I would just like to give the speech to our dear lecturers who would like to welcome you officially. So first of all, Sofia, would you be so kind to welcome us on behalf of the Hungarian Tourism Agency as the Deputy CEO representing this authority?
Madam President, Mr. President, Madam Deputy General Director, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you for your invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here and attend today's event, as I believe protecting and promoting European gardens is an important task, and not only from the point of view of tourism, because it goes beyond the boundaries of this sector. The role of cultural tourism is gaining importance among other tourism products. Data shows that garden tourism attractions lead to tourists staying longer, and it also motivates them to travel more often. This is partly due to the increased importance of outdoor and nature-related activities during the pandemic, as well as a greater need to explore local attractions and hidden places. In Hungary, there are almost 2,000 gardens of natural, historic, and landscape architectural value. In fact, three of Hungary's major tourist destinations, the Royal Palace of Gödöllő, Festetics Palace in Keszthely, and Almási Palace in Gyula, attracted a total of over 750,000 visitors in the summer of 2021 and 2022, which shows the outstanding potential of garden tourism for the Hungarian sector. At the same time, I think it's important to stress that we can't measure the value of the tourist attractions in terms of visitor numbers. While a piece of jewelry is meant to reveal the beauty hidden in the precious metal gemstones, an ornament garden is the embodiment of the harmony. It shows us what it's like to cultivate the land not for food, agriculture, and housing, but to nurture nature for peace of tranquility. Walking through a garden, we can't experience how peaceful coexistence with nature has been imagined in different times and cultures. Gardens are a place for relaxation and recharging faith and tranquility. In this sense, gardens are perhaps the most complex tourist attraction in Europe, including Hungary. They are both part of our culture, heritage, and living, ever-changing natural requires constant care. This is why boosting outdoor garden tourism is one of our priorities for Hungary. To the end, the Hungarian Tourism Agency has entered into a strategic partnership with the Hungarian Garden Heritage Foundation. We will support each other in marketing communication, the development of a rating system for Hungarian garden heritage sites, and to promotion of garden heritage sites as a tourist attraction both in Hungary and abroad. At the same time, the preservation of the Hungarian garden for prosperity of duty that goes beyond the tourism. This is why we feel it's practically important that we've been invited to today's event and forum and given an opportunity to play an active role in the conservation, care, and development of our garden heritage through joint cooperation. So this is a joyful task and a great responsibility, and I wish us all strength and success for this implementation. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much. Zsófia Jakab on behalf of the Hungarian Tourism Agency. As the Deputy CEO highlighted, what a great task we have at our disposal now, and this is a great opportunity. We highly appreciate this backup and support that you also represent on behalf of the Hungarian Tourism Agency. We, from the Hungarian Garden Heritage Foundation, appreciate it a lot. So at the same time, I would like to welcome all who are also listening us online, because we have like more than 20, approximately 25 participants joining us. So thank you for all joining us in person here in Budapest, but also for those who join us through the YouTube channel. So yes, now we would follow with the speeches for our dear host here at the Petőfi Literature Museum. So let me please introduce you the Deputy Director, Zsuzsanna Kalla, who would like to welcome you as well. Please, Zsuzsanna. Oh, you. And yeah, just a practical detail. I have the pleasure to be the English voice in this case of Zsuzsanna, because it was such an unfortunate case that it was a surprise for her as well, because unfortunately the director, Szilárd Demeter, couldn't join us for Health Matters last minute. So thank you for your understanding and flexibility in these regards, and I will do my best, try to do my best to translate what Zsuzsanna is sharing
Thank you
with
for your help.
You're welcome.
Tisztelettel és szeretettel köszöntök mindenkit itt a Petőfi Irodalmi Múzeumban, a Károlyi Palotának a falai között. Nagyon jó látni az ismerős arcokat. A kerttörténet mindig is az irodalmi múzeológiának a fókuszpontjában állt.
I would like to welcome everybody with honor and pleasure here at the Petőfi Literature Museum, and also those whom I have the chance to know since a while. And the history of gardens is in our soul since a while, and it was always in the focus. So it's really a pleasure to have you by us.
Intézményünk, a Petőfi Irodalmi Múzeum örökségül kapta Pest történelmi belvárosának a legnagyobb zöld felületét, a Károlyi kertet. A károlyiak tulajdonában lévő bekerített mintakert többféle funkciót kapott a 19. század során, díszkertként, de már nagyon korán pihenőkertként is működött.
Our institution, this Literature Museum, inherited Pest, Buda and Pest side. Pest is historical downtown's marvelous garden, the Károlyi Garden. This garden, which was also in the Károlyi family's ownership, is a walled sample garden, but also fulfilled multiple functions during the age. Also, it was an ornamental garden, but also a rest garden.
Ugye most a palotának a 19. század végi műemléki helyreállítását látják, de a palotának volt egy fénykora a reformkorban. Ekkor grófi engedéllyel már mindenki, vagy nagyon sokan látogathatták egészségük miatt a friss levegőre vágyók a kertet, és volt egy nagyon izgalmas, egzotikus növényeket bemutató üvegház is a kertünkben.
Throughout the 19th and the 20th century, many people frequented this garden also for health matters. There were many people who came to get the fresh air and to take their rest at the benches, but also to appreciate the greenhouse that was established inside.
A 20. században ez a kert az egyszerre volt közösségi kert, amit most is lehet látni, padokkal, játszóterekkel, és egyben múzeumkert is, tehát ketté vált a kertnek a funkciója. A múzeumkertben szabadtéri koncerteket, rendezvényeket tartottak.
In the 20th century, this garden, both as an ornamental garden as a rest garden, with their benches, playgrounds, and the sites that was really for enriching and recharging the batteries, was a great place to welcome as well outdoor exhibitions and concerts. So it was really a great community garden.
Egy különleges kísérletünk volt 2005-ben az Irodalmi Magyar Herbárium című kiállítás, ahol magába a múzeumkertbe telepítettük be műtárgyként a növényeket, tehát fákat, cserjéket, különböző virágokat.
We had a particular experimentation in the 19th century when we gave site for this sort of literature herbarium for Hungary, where the particular plants were also, together with the herbal plants with their particular scents, were also planted in between the walled garden at that time to show it as a masterpiece, like object of art. So that was already a link between the items of the culture and the garden.
A fák, a virágok, a cserjék, a gyógynövények illata mellett a kiállítás látogatója elmerenghetett a növények melletti sorokon és írói fényképeken.
Besides these plants and bush and all these ornamental elements of the nature, the visitors could also amuse themselves reading out the literature lines that were featured next to the benches and enjoy this time in the garden.
Igen, a padokon olvasnivaló várta a megpihenőket, és sikeresen építettük be az egyik legismertebb magyar költőnő, Nemes Nagy Ágnesnek a Nyíló gesztenyefák című versét, ugye az udvaron álló gesztenyefákhoz.
There are a lot of readings prepared next to the benches. And besides that, one of our authors, Ágnes Nemes Nagy, had a poem which has the title Chestnut, due to the garden's chestnut trees as well. So they could really feel the smell of it and look around and see how it can be reflected in the literature art oeuvre.
A kurátorok Lénárt Sándornak, a kalandos életű magyar írónak, aki a Mici Mackónak az első latin nyelvű tolmácsolója volt, a mottóját választották címadóul.
Yeah, so there will be, we try to sit now the translator of Winnie the Pooh, the first translator of the Winnie the Pooh story, because they...
Lénárt Sándor, igen.
So the curator chosen a motto, and this motto comes from the first translator of Winnie the Pooh. And he says,
van-e kertcentrikus világnézet? Azt hiszem van, ha a világ vadon, mindegy melyik pontját nevezzük ki közepének. Az emberi valóságok közepe épp úgy lehet könyvtár, mint kert.
So the question is whether there exists a world view centered around gardens. I think yes. If the word or the state of the nature of the word can be the center of it, the garden can also be the center. If we take the human realities, their center can also be a library, but also the garden.
A Petőfi Irodalmi Múzeum két történelmi kertet is gondoz. Az egyik a Budán lévő Jókai kert, tehát a 19. század végi próza, magyar prózának a nagy alakja, itt egy fantasztikus kertgazdaságot épített ki.
So the Petőfi Literature Museum is taking care of two gardens, one which is the so-called Jókai garden, and it's also established as a prose, so around the literature's poems and thematic.
Most egy sétakert.
And this time it serves as a garden,
kert.
Literature garden for walks, so to ramble around.
A másik pedig Észak-Magyarországon, Széphalomban van, Kazinczy Ferencnek a szülőhelyén.
The other one is in the northern part of Hungary, which is the birthplace of Ferenc Kazinczy.
Kazinczy a magyar nyelv megújítója volt, de ezen kívül az angol parkoknak is a teoretikusa, tehát az ő emlékére hoztuk létre tulajdonképpen a Széphalmi kertet.
It is in memorial to Kazinczy. He was also in charge of the renewal of the Hungarian language, but also with regards the garden heritage, he took quite an important role. So that's in memorial to him that it has been established, and he had a great task as well with regards English parks.
Ha most kinéznek a kertbe, akkor látják, hogy hatalmas átalakulás előtt állunk. Egybe fog nyílni a Károlyi palota korábban különvált két kertje. Úgyhogy nagyon remélem, hogy tavasszal ismét visszatér majd a kertbe az irodalom, és ennek jegyében kívánok sikeres és eredményes tanácskozást mindannyiuknak.
So if you look around now, and we'll have the chance to take a look from the terrace later on, you will see that the garden is going under reconstruction. And we would be really happy to welcome you in springtime, when hopefully you can be surprised to have the two gardens, the garden which belongs to the museum garden, the Petőfi Literature Museum, and the Karoi Garden, that it will return to be one garden as a whole, and we hope that you will also enjoy literature in this garden surrounding. And Zsuzsanna, Kala would like to wish you a fruitful and really enriching exchange moment in here for the forum, so welcome all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zsuzsanna. And now I have the pleasure to welcome Mr. Dulcet, Jaume Dulcet, on behalf of the European Route of Historic Gardens. So, Mr. President, we are listening to your words.
Stia, bon dia, buenos días, bonjour, bon dia, buongiorno, buenos días a todos, good morning to everyone. It's such a great honor to be here with you today. Everything started at 2016, where we were just a few, and we made it step by step, and nowadays we are already 38 gardens from 24 institutions from all over 9 countries of Europe. And at the end of the day, we expect to be more if everything goes okay in this General Assembly that we will have this afternoon. We became an authentic and powerful European project, just having connections with everyone and connecting by the gardens the culture of Europe. Last April, in Lloret de Mar, in my beloved city, we made this certification award ceremony where we received this label of the Council of Europe. And it was a really moment of joy to be together again after this horrible pandemic and to restart again our normal lives. I just want to say really thanks, many thanks, thousands of thanks to the Hungarian Garden Heritage Foundation, especially to Agnes, to Geri, and of course to Edina, that she takes the control of everything, the real control of everything, for their wonderful organization, which it's quite obvious that everything is very well organized, and for the big effort that they did creating the program and the relationship they made between the site of today, the Petoffi Literature Museum, very thanks to host us, and the visits that we will do in the Karoli Gardens and the Margaret Island, and the literature and the gardens. So I'm not getting longer. Let's just enjoy the day. Let's take profit of the journey. And of course, as I said at the beginning, I'm absolutely happy to have you all here from all over Europe and to make this incredible project a reality. So thank you so much, and let's work.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Dulcet. And now I have the honor to welcome our president on behalf of the Hungarian Garden Heritage Foundation. So let me please introduce you, Agnes Herceg. And we are ready to listen to your opening presentation.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, dear guests, there is a strong relationship between the garden and literature. Creation meets legend, gardens of fairy tales, and Judeo-Christian culture. Biblical gardens symbolize the mystical relationship between the created world and man. Paradise is the beginning and the desired goal of every gardener. Garden and literature are also inseparably connected in Hungarian culture. Etymologically, our word for garden means a horizontal separation of an area from the world, which has a gate. If we walk through the garden gate, we enter a separate universe, which is vertically connected to the sky, a link between heaven and earth. So we can say that the garden is a fenced infinity. And there are many names of the Hungarian gardens, as many ways of using it: flower, treasure, vegetable garden, orchard, turf, stackyard, hazel, rabbit, bean garden, and so on. The relationship between gardens and literature can be recalled since the time we have written records, and there have been eras that have emphasized it even more than considered it more important. The leading Hungarian figures of the Renaissance culture were walking around their gardens with their pocketbooks of antique poets and philosophers. And from this point, it can be traced that the garden and literature are integral and inseparable. For years, we have been organized conference with, in cooperation with other organizations, universities, aiming to explore the relationship between garden art and other forms of art. In 2020, the focus was on the garden as literature. Unfortunately, due to the limitation of COVID, we were only able to organize the conference online. The lack of face-to-face meetings and discussion was balanced by the fact that the invited speakers undertook write longer articles. So I would like briefly introduce this volume because it provides the fascination picture, a relationship between gardens and literature. Here is this book about, unfortunately it's a Hungarian language. But I would like briefly introduce. Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. Our Persian-born colleague Rachna Mazadeh begins her article, The Garden of Words, with the inseparable relationship between garden and fairy tale in childhood memories. The open-air genre, the tale at the storyteller is the Nakvali, where the storyteller performs the story in the streets, squares, gardens, and cafes in front of canvas. Persian culture is not only the cradle of garden culture, but also of the overall artistic concept that the garden units. Poetry plays a primary role in this. Poems by favorite poets are displayed on garden walls and facades, garden pavilions. And the graves of the greatest poets are placed in historic gardens, for example, Hafez in Shiraz. This garden is still a place of pilgrimage today where visitors recite the poet's poetic reflections spanning and connecting the centuries over this tomb. Judith Biro brings the theme of love to the intersection of garden and literature. The most famous garden in the intricate stories of Greek mythology, depicting all human nature and divine predestination in the Garden of Hera. She then goes on to discuss the qualities and the teachings of nature, gardens, and plants in relation to mythological figures and places. Máté Sárospataki showed the connection between Christian spirituality and gardens through Hungarian poetry. He undertakes to present the appearance of these sites, landscape and garden of the Holy Scriptures in the poetry or for Hungarian poets, but analyzing a chosen work of their poetry. Barbara Solyom was given a special emphasis by the pandemic. Boccaccio's well-known works is set during the plague epidemic in Florence. Our speaker focuses on the gardens that provide the frame setting and events that take place in them. And in her final remarks, she concludes that the literary text itself can be seen as a kind of garden. And Franco Ferrucci, who argues that the literature is a garden of symbols, and the garden is therefore a privileged symbol of literature. My lectures exploit Goethe's time and worldwide. Attraction and Choices, a work about human relationship, take place during the construction of the landscape garden. Among his drawings are two of what were Celonica's gigantical visual poiesis, which may be a foreigner of land art or nature art. The poet, who himself built and cultivated gardens, wrote a study of the new landscape perception in Claude Lorrain canvases. In his work, Italian Journey, he states, "I have been to Arcadia." The garden historian Niedemann concludes that there were two areas of the intellectual revolution in Goethe's time, literature and garden art. Zsolt Nagy spoke about Tom Stoppard's Arcadia. The work of the British dramatist and screenwriter of Czech origin was first performed in 1998 in Budapest in Katona József Theatre. One strand of Stoppard's drama set in 1809 emphasized the metaphorical role of the garden. In the dialogue between the landscape architect Mr. Knox, the designer of the grandiose transformation of Sidley Park, and his client, Lady Crome, Stoppard describes the state of Western culture with the garden as a symbol of beauty, order, continuity, and tradition, threatened by the advance of cheap sentiment and fast excitement. Lajos Ambrus speaks of the sacred tradition of Hungarian gardening, since the garden is not merely profane. It is Eden itself. He quotes from the earliest preserved horticultural work, Hungarian, The Garden in Pozsony, 1664. He lists the plant name of the first documents and codices in Hungarian, or those containing Hungarian names, the horticultural excellence of the great woman of the Hungarian Renaissance and its literary roots. Eva Szikra spoke about of Ferenc Kazinczy, the most influential figure of the Hungarian Enlightenment and Hungarian language revive. We spoke about Zsuzsanna for garden design. He knew the great garden theorist of this time, took notes and made sketches during his travel. He dreamed of his own garden in Széphalom. Today, Széphalom is not only a nationally literary and linguistic pantheon, but also a monument of Hungarian garden art. Mátra Paragi gave a lecture on the gardening passion of Mór, Jókai Mór, one of the most successful writers of the 19th century. Petőfi Literary Museum prepared a literary exhibition in the garden of Jókai in the Buda Hills. Jókai wrote extensively on gardens and horticulture, and his works are also influenced with knowledge of landscape, gardens, and plants. The next was Imola Tár and Katalin Takács. summaries the literary aspect of his particular garden genre. In the first half of the 19th century, the Hungarian Reformation connected the enthusiasm for the beauty of landscape with summer and winter holiday, the discovery of health resorts, and the promotion of their development and revitalization. In the 20th century, writers' honorariums were used to create holiday and artistic resorts. These gardens also became literary salons. Albert Fekete notes that there is a long list of sites, almost all of which are local cultural centers where literature, language, the expression of ideas on paper, and the social life that is organized around this took place. He spoke about that it can be said that up the 17th century, the royal and noble courts and the ecclesiastical center of Transylvania, poetry and prose alike found at a home. Finally, Anna Eplényi and Gergely Kardevan Lapis discussed the relationship of Transylvanian writers with the garden in their lecture. The literary garden created in the wildflower orchard of the church garden of Magyarvalkó is an example of how the interpretation of landscape and garden manifests itself in literature, and how literature helped to lead us back to nature, to landscape, to ourselves, and to our culture through gardens. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Agnes, for your lecture and also for respecting the time. What a great example that we had in here, and also coming from the speakers. I couldn't miss it. Yeah, especially thanks to the followers, and just a practical remark, we are recording following the instruction and rather the wish of our European Route of Historic Gardens wish, all the program. So everyone, we are happy to see the smiling faces of enjoying this forum, because you can then receive it from the recording later on. So let me please introduce you Ana Rosa. I'm quite sure that you know her since a while. So she's the engine and all the organization on behalf of the European Route of Historic Gardens related to this forum. I had the chance to arrange it with her, and now I will give the speech to you and the scene. Yes, the speech to introduce our further lecturers, coming also from Esterháza, and also from Italy, from the Boboli Gardens. So please.
Thank you, Edina. You almost said it all. So she decided to put me to work. So I will introduce our next lecturer. It is our garden partner, Esterházy Kaszeli Park. And the director, Katalin Egresitsne, was supposed to give the lecture, but she cannot make it for professional reasons. So we have here today Adam Osvath, the head of the tourism department at Esterházy Kaszeli Park, and he will give the lecture, Literature and Poems at Esterháza. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed conference. In the history of European culture, regardless of the era, the garden is always a home of culture, a symbol and carrier of arts and civilizational values. As the Gombos Garden of the Perényis in Sárospatak, or the linden tree dedicated to Apollo by Bishop Radetzky, were humanist, intellectuals meeting points where they could be inspired literary works as early as the 16th century. Esterházy's Apollo Hall and Esterházy's gardens are also direct continuations of these cultural and historical and literary traditions. Historical memory defines our identity, who we are, where we came from, and where we are going. Nowadays, when cancel culture is in fashion, when our identity is being questioned, short points, fixed points are important. Faith, family, nation, and the fourth identity forming fixed point is our past, our history. Reminders of our history are memorial sites, heritage sites, and historical gardens also. The Baroque is an era, only a small slice of Hungary's 1,000-year-old history, but it is one of the most significant in our thinking, philosophy, art, and culture. The Esterházy Palace in Fertőt is the most impressive Baroque Rococo palace, garden, and landscape in our country. It was a dominant intellectual, cultural, and entertainment center at the 18th century, Central Europe, and its influence and charm are still present today. The name of Joseph Haydn, one of the greatest musician geniuses in the 18th century, merged with Esterházy. Esterházy is an inspiring location of the arts, where the garden, nature, culture, music interacted and inspired by each other. In the first part of my presentation, I reviewed the relationship between the Fertő, the Neusiedl, landscape, and the palace that lives in it. Then I move on to the relationship between the palace, Baroque, Rococo environment, and literature. The Esterházy Palace in Fertőt is one of the most prestigious historical locations at the Fertő cultural landscape. The landscape in which the palace lives is outstanding in itself. With its unique microclimate, unique flora and fauna, it is considered the westernmost saltwater steppe lake at Eurasia. It is a particular example of how the interactions between the landscape and the society living in the shape of how it was formed and changed for the thousands of years as a result of its effects. For this reason, it was the first cultural landscape in Hungary to receive the World Heritage title, and in 2001 it was added to the World Cultural Heritage list as joint heritage of Hungary and Austria. The Fertő often played fairy games with the mortals, writes Mór Jókai in his works The Nameless Castle, published in the 19th century. Allow me to quote a few lines from the novel that exemplify a captious vitality of Fertő. Once another came to mind for the Fertő. He reappointed himself a lake, reclaiming his dignity, and sowing of homesteads disappeared again under the green wave mirror. Only the chimney of steam mills has been left as a testimony to a fairy tale of dreamed-of paradise. In addition to the World Heritage title, Fertő is a Hungarium, a national monument and a place of special importance, received the European Heritage Award for the Pan-European Picnic, with which it became a heritage site of outstanding importance for common European values, historical past, and common cultural heritage. The garden of Esterházy Palace is part of the European route of history garden. We have historical sources from the 18th century about the second largest Baroque garden in Europe, Baroque Rococo garden in Europe, which paint a true-to-life picture of the park surrounding the palace and at the time. The following excerpt from the source is a good example of how, even in Esterházy's early period, garden planning was carried out to accordance with the watchword of conscious landscape use. Next to this village, there is only one forest, the so-called Lis or Lés. The forest is guarded with caution because of the pheasants, partridges, and rabbits kept in it, and although oaks grow in it, they cannot be cut. Only the acorns are allowed to pick up to feed the pigs. And because of this forest, there are beautiful alleys running from the ornamental garden to the castle to St. Miklós. Grass can be obtained from them, especially if the allotments are cleaned properly. True art is not self-surfing, at least not until the 20th century. Dazzle, fascinates, or conveys something to say. Communicates thoughts, shows values, and can also be used as a tool of power. It is always an imprint of the thinking of the given era, in our case, the 18th century. Gardens and parks can be imprinted similarly. The built landscape and works of the garden art represent the imprint of the culture, showing its richness and level of education. Baroque literature and garden both go back to the culture of antiquity, but their purpose is more profane, delight and entertain, but at the same time to break away from the wars of the everyday life which abounded in the 18th century. I will quote from a poet, Daniel Bergeny, from the 18th century. Cypress, I fell down to gulfs at dusk, and I sing my first loves. I will sing for which me love and bitterness taught me. Float around me, heavenly oh float. Garnish your magic belt with charms. Cover me with your amber foliage, and let Lolly's gentle hand give me my wages. Allow me to briefly introduce the country's largest Baroque Rococo palace and its surroundings, one of the most outstanding monuments of the Fertő landscape. Esterházy Palace is one of the most popular tourist destinations in Hungary, one of the most important historical monuments. The estate, the palace and its garden are also extremely important from the point of view of the heritage protection and the management. The heritage, which dates back more than 300 years, began to develop during the construction of Duke József Esterházy and later became one of the most important Central European estates of the 18th century, which was called the Hungarian Versailles at the time. After the expansions of Miklós Esterházy, the Magnificent. The Duke, often referred as to a lover of pomp and luxury, paid great attention to expansion of the palace as well as to the landscaping. Whatever the emperor can do, I can do too. The Duke built one of his largest Baroque Rococo palaces in Central Europe in the spirit of this sentence. Duke Miklós was a lover of culture, especially music and theater. He built an opera house and a puppet theater using all the means of the Baroque Rococo splendor of the 18th century. He employed German theater companies and Italian and French ballet dancers. Many Shakespeare dramas was also performed first at Esterházy here in Hungary. Among others, world-famous French dancer and ballet artist Jean-Georges Noverre danced here, on whose birthday we celebrate the World Dance Day. Joseph Haydn, the world-famous composer who created the genre, was the head of his orchestra. Here at Esterházy, he wrote his greatest works, including the world-famous Farewell Symphony. One of Haydn's puppet operas is also based on Greek mythology. In the story of Philemon and Baucis, an old married couple who were gifted by the gods in exchange for their services, they are simultaneously overtaken by fate, by death, and they could turn into a tree. You can see here a picture about one of our trees, the Esterházy garden, and a quote from the Philemon and Baucis. The second golden age of Esterházy was at the early 20th century, during the Duke Esterházy Miklós IV and his wife Margit Cziráky. Thanks to the Duke and the Duchess, the renewal and the expansion of the palace started. The garden got another color spot on the palette of Esterházy's heritage. They started next to the French garden and the English landscape garden, a rose garden. The memory of this kept by the Margit Cziráky Rose Garden, one of the most beautiful sites in Esterházy today. The history of the Esterházy Palace in Fertőd, which goes back for many centuries, it is an excellent example how the former raw landscape is transformed into a cultural landscape under the influence of human activity living in it, taking into account of natural values. The poet Lajos Harsányi lived at Esterházy during the early 20th century, and after the death of the Duchess Margit Cziráky, he remembered the Duchess with a poem from which I will quote. Since she left, alas, the big park is dead. The old sycamore trees are sobbing. Misty-eyed autumn is weeping beneath them, and memories are old sorrow. The castle has been dead since she left. The golden painting seems rueful. Silk and brocades slowly fade. They don't feel anymore the velvet hand. The connection between the palace and the Fertő landscape can be found two places at the palace. The original condition of the Sala Arena and the Marionette Theatre is provided by description of the castle and travelers' reports. One of the central spaces of this palace is a reception room of the ground floor, the Sala Arena, which is decorated with motifs referring to the estate's natural environment. The spacious rooms of meeting point of natural treasures and man-made fine art wonders. The source of these wonders is the Fertő landscape itself. The green and silver colors of the decorative motifs evoke the marshy wildlife of Lake Fertő. The flower garlands decorating the walls also refer to natural environment. They serve as a kind of front garden because the carved flowers are only a few meters away from their real counterparts blooming into the garden. Today, only these elements refer to the nearby lake, but before the destruction caused by the Second World War, many more motifs evoking the world of the Fertő decorated the walls. The life-size wall whales, gargoyles, storks, and frogs on the walls show the world of the reeds of the nearby Lake Fertő in the interior of the palace. In one of the annexes belonging to the palace, in the building referred to as a puppet or marionette theater, the goal was to display nature and living world of the Fertő in a built environment. The interior of the marionette theater looked like an artificial cave. I would like to quote you from a description from the 1773. The whole decoration of the new genre is also made with the rarest and most exquisite taste. The whole interior of the hall was covered with shells and small gravel caves, some of which were painted and exquisitely crafted walls, while the rest contained small fountains that made a very pleasant rumbling sound. The pebbles were sprinkling with glittering dust that shone wonderfully from the light of the chandelier that illuminated them. Plays and opera performances, musical life were forms in the entertainment and culture. It was particularly important for the Hungarian lords and noblemen. They considered their own culture in a higher rank than from Vienna. In Hungarian culture, poetry has always been connected with the strengthening and preservation of national identity. In the 19th century, the literary symbol system was used with acquainted and cultivated culture of the garden that housed poetry with development of the culture. Esterházy's garden presented the same cultural value system in the 18th century, just like at the 17th century. The poet Márton Dallos directly identified the Lés forest belonging to Esterházy Park with Elysium, the home of the favored one of the gods. The garden of Esterházy was immortalized by the prominent figure of the Hungarian Enlightenment, György Bessenyei, a member of the Hungarian Royal Bodyguards, in his work, The Festivities at Esterházy. The poem was written exactly 215 years ago in 1777. The story of the poem is that the French ambassador, Cardinal and Duke Rohan, visited Esterházy. The emissary who liked luxurious lifestyle was impressed by the palace and the garden of Miklós Esterházy the Magnificent. With his visit, Esterházy also became a stage for the European representation of the Hungarian aristocracy. There is a quote from this poem. Only this day, they only took a walk in the morning. They enjoyed the fresh air. They went out into the garden. The trees were painted by sophisticated art, and they stood nearly side by side. They were long paths between their thick twigs where the stillness lurked. Culture is one of the areas of the politics, and Miklós Esterházy, the Magnificent, recognized this very well, but also found that the Greek mythology is also important. They had many gods here in Esterházy. I would like to give a quote from the Metamorphosis from Ovid, which shows us in Apollo Hall's fresco. Esterházy's Apollo Hall is actually a garden created with the tools of interior design and decorative paintings within the walls and the palace. In the four corners of the room, the allegorical figures of the four seasons simultaneously symbolize the passage of time and the strict order of the seasons that determine the order of nature. Flora, the goddess of spring, Ceres, the goddess of summer, Diana, the goddess of autumn, and Boreas, the god of winter. Esterházy and its garden are a creation of all the arts. It is not just made of bricks, it rests on spiritual foundations, musical scores, poems, mythology, and philosophy. Esterházy is an inexhaustible source of miracles, the Baroque itself. Thank you for your attention.
Now is the time for our dear Bianca Maria Landi. She is the coordinator of Boboli Gardens, one of our first partners. She is head of garden department and curator of the botanical heritage of Uffizi Galleries. She is also a member of our scientific committee, and she is going to give us the lecture, What Women Write, Travelers, Storytellers, and Poets in Boboli Gardens. The floor is yours, Bianca.
Thank you very much. Thank you, dear friends, dear colleagues. It's always a pleasure to have the opportunity to share this moment of knowledge together. First of all, let me say a very deep thank you to the friends of the Hungarian Garden Heritage Foundation for the warm welcome and the perfect organization. We're getting used to it. And Anna Rosa, a very special thank you to you for all the effort in organizing the forum. Marco Tullio Cicerone, in his Epistolae ad Familiares, said, Si hortum in bibliotheca habes, deerit nihil. If you have a garden nearby your library, you won't need anything else. Well, I think that these words symbolize a perfect synthesis of an inspiration, that one that symbolizes the deep link between garden and literature, and the one that gave birth to many works of art through times. The history of literature, we know, it also passes through gardens. If we think about, for example, Dante and his Divine Comedy, and Dante, at the end of his journey, returns to paradise, and paradise is nothing but a garden. And it's the place of utopia and the origins of human history, the image of time in which man was happy. The paradise is similar in this sense in its physical confirmation to many literary gardens, places, cultivated gardens with plants with positive virtues and where meteorological disturbances are absent. The garden is itself the negation of time, of passing of human life and death. The garden is a divine work, constitutes the archetype of every other place of peace on earth. Garden and books, garden and literature, I always like to share this image of the Hypnerotomachia Polyphili. It is considered the most beautiful books in the world in terms of art of printing, and its wonderful woodcuts that are inspired by the Renaissance garden. It's an allegorical novel, but it can be considered one of the first example of the deep presence of garden in books and in literature. Gardens have been an inspiration through the centuries for literary works, and Agnes, before me, you mentioned the poetry of Hafez Shirazi, the Persian poet, but there are plenty of examples of the presence of gardens through literature. Marcel Proust, the Decameron of Boccaccio, Giacomo Leopardi in his Zibaldone, thousands of examples of how much gardens have been inspiring places for the production of literature work of art. And starting from this consideration that involves also Bubbly Garden, we decided in 2021 to start this project that is called Bubbly Literary Garden, a series of free guided visits to talk about the garden, to tell and to give voice to the garden through the words of the artists and poets and people who wrote through time about it. We have plenty of examples, one of all, Hermann Hesse, who said that his first memory of his staying in Florence was not the magnificence of the monument, nor the typical dialect spoken by the people, but a memory inside the Bubbly Garden, the small red fishes in one of the ponds of the Bubbly Garden. So we decided to start this project, and in the new edition that took place in 2022, we wanted to give a special focus on the voices of female writers inside Bubbly Garden, to give a place to their specific point of view, to the grace of the narration sometimes, and much more, and we will see it later. We found out from the previous experience the past year that it's a good way to involve visitors inside the atmosphere of the garden, to let them experiment and feel the garden as a place of inspiration, to be really a part of a creative process, the same creative process that inspired through times a lot of authors. So we start from the consideration that, yes, probably the culture in the past was a privilege, sort of privilege of few men, and it was even less for women, but it does not mean that we're not women that were artists or intellectuals or travels and wanted to give memories and impressions and transform these experiences into work of art. So that's why this new edition of this project in Bubbly wanted to give voices to these authors. And we choose some of them, like Kathleen Raine, Dalkeith Holmes, Zadie Smith, Magdalene Nebb. And then we found out that the female writers had, especially in contemporary times, a special attention to mystery and to thrillers writing. And it has been a chance for us to involve people in this particular point of view and sensation and atmosphere that the garden was giving to them. And Kathleen Raine, we choose one of her poetries to start this edition of the Bubbly Literary Garden project. She is an English poetess, not very well known, I have to say, in Italy. In fact, most of her works generally are not translated in Italian, but in the poetry Daisies of Florence, she gave a deep and very particular atmosphere about the garden. So, bambini picking daisies in the new spring grass of the Bubbly Gardens. Now and now and now, in rosy petal fingers hold a multitude of time. To the limits of the small and florets, innumerable of white and gold, they know their daisies real. Botticelli with daisies from the timeless fields of recollection scatters that bring that bright Elysium of paradise, whose flowers none can gather, where spirits immortal walk forever. With her who walks through spring after spring in primavera robed, ripening the transient under her veil. In this poetry, the garden becomes a place of time and heart, and the cycle of season, when she said, in the new spring grass, from timeless field, spring after spring, in spring dress, shows the infinity of time and the infinity of the human spirit. That's why That's why she writes where immortal spirits walk forever. And the poem speaks in the sense of eternity, represented by the grandeur of an art, that one of Botticelli, destined to last forever. In appearance, however, is not just an eternity of memory, of beautiful things, but of the spirit, the eternity of the soul, of the essence. And bambini, the children, in the act of picking the new daisies, at the same time grasp an infinite life process, and although intangible, whose flowers no one can pick. And this intangible process becomes concrete in the act of picking the daisies. In fact, shepherds, they know their daisies are real. Those small flowers, so, that return every spring after the apparent vital interruption of winter, symbolize the eternal cycle of life and death. And the expression picking daisies is strongly linked to children who, in the act of picking flowers, ideally pushed by the death, and pick up the baton and carry on life, the eternal cycle of life and death. But not just poetesses inside the Boboli Garden, but also travelers. And one of the first women to write about Boboli Gardens has been Delkate Holmes, is an English woman, and she's the author of a travel report entitled Ride on Horseback to Florence. And Mrs. Holmes, in his journey made in the company of her husband in the first half of the 19th century, described the Boboli Garden in its panoramic value more than made a focus on the artistic value of the place, but she describes Boboli as a privileged point of view toward his city, toward the city of Firenze, like a sort of green heart inside the city. But going to the contemporary authors, we have Zadie Smith. She is an English writer too, and she wrote a tale, a book that is called Love in the Gardens, and the gardens are the Boboli ones, and tells of the visit he made in the company of his father. And what is strange is that through the words of this author, we can find out how different are the sensation that the same place and the same typical elements of an historic garden, like the Cerchiata Grande, this green tunnel made with curved branches of holm oak, can give to different authors. So the same place that inspires calm to Zadie Smith is the one that can give totally different impression to other authors, and we will see. And because of it's always a good time to play, during this series of tours with our visitors, we want to involve them in this sort of creative literary game, because we want the people to be part of the creation, of the creativity process. So while we are moving towards the garden, especially when we arrive in this specific section of the garden, that is the upper botanical garden that we reopened to the public 4 years ago after years of restoration, but the garden was closed and opened just in a few occasions. Now that it's open, now that it's always open, we took the people there and we asked, imagine that you are a writer. What role would these tanks have in your story? What role would have this place in your story? And so the game starts. And we want people to feel the sense of inspiration that the garden can give them, so they can understand better what it has been the same process for the authors in the past. And the question are, imagine you're a writer of romance novel. Which genre would you set in this place? But more, imagine you being a writer of thrillers. or detective stories. How would a place like this fit into your story? And the answer is more or less always the same. Hide on a tree, hide on a corpse, in the pool of the Lemna Minor. So it's also a different way to give some botanic news and botanic, to let them keep in mind also other aspects in terms of botanic. A different way to vehicle, the same concept, but maybe it is a not so boring, approach. So this game, as I told you, has a function of involving visitors, and this is one of our first goal. We want people to experiment the atmosphere of Boboli Garden, not just as a place to work through, not just listening a story of the place like something that you keep on feeling with a sort of distance, but people to develop a sense of care of the place, must be completely involved into the place, also with the inspiring sensation that the place can give to. So, as I told you before, women just had this special approach to the mystery that the place and Boboli Gardens can inspire to them. For example, in the works of Magdalene Knapp, with the adventure of this Marshal Guarnaccia, that is a man that works in trying to solve mysteries, and the setting is always the Boboli Garden. Is the place of work is the Boboli Garden. But also other female mystery writers, Christabel Kent, Lucrezia Grindle, and the same place, the Cerchiata, that inspires calm and tranquility to one author, it's at the place of, where a murder have a set inside Boboli Garden. So, just some data to close. The visits took place in the spring, but now we are offering the same visits also during autumn season. And we wanted to share this experience with as much people as possible. So we recorded also these videos on the Boboli Literary Gardens to let the people can look at them also in the official social media of the Uffizi Galleries. And these videos are shared hundreds of times, so it's a very huge contribute to the knowledge of the contents of this initiative and to the to what we want to give as an offer for the visitors of the Boboli Garden. What about the future? Finally, not just literature, art, paintings, the Boboli Gardens also inspired musicians. So who knows, maybe from the idea for the future, we have also the idea of creating and bringing an opera expressly dedicated to the garden. And taking the occasion to say a big thank you to all my collaborators in Boboli Garden and my colleagues, because it's always teamwork. I would like to say thank you also to the person who had the idea of developing these Boboli Garden tours. It's Gabriele Morandis, one of our collaborators, and is the spokesperson in these tours. Let's say finally that I'm very proud of all the steps that we made since the very beginning of the network. And thank you, and I really want to express my big thanks for this occasion of sharing that are always precious for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bianca. It was really inspiring to see such a great best practice in connection to garden literature and also tourism-wise. So very inspiring. Thank you very much. And we are very curious to see what the next theme will be. So thank you very much again. And for all joining us for this first section, starting with the welcome speeches. And also we appreciate that you could join us on behalf of the Hungarian Tourism Agency as well, and following it with the Agnes opening lecture, then Adam as well, and last but not least, Bianca, representing the Bovoli Garden. So let's say that what about getting some refreshments, and let's see you in like 25 minutes, 10:35 if you don't have your watch on it, it would be. So just enjoy what the museum around has to offer. You'll have all the signs for the restroom, toilet, but I'd rather say not to leave yet the museum. During the lunch break, we're going to have the guided walk tour in the Károly Garden that Zsuzsanna, on behalf of the museum, has shared with you via the pictures. You can see it also projected. So have a great coffee break, and see you later. Anna Rosa asked me to highlight that it's 10:40. I said 10:35. Yeah, so you have still 5 minutes.